Hi, I'm Professor Melissa and I love to cruise. Choosing the right cruise for you can be pretty daunting. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to choose the right cruise for you. The first step to actually taking a cruise is, well, booking one, of course. And this by itself can be wildly overwhelming because there are so many options. You can literally cruise anywhere in the world. There are so many cruise lines. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where to start. My biggest recommendation is to find a cruise aggregator. My recommendation is Cruise Direct. I'll drop the link in the description. Pull that up, use this to filter by search criteria, and I'll go through what you should consider, and that will help you narrow down your options to something more manageable. The first things I recommend are narrowing it down based on the big three. The first is really important, and that is, where do you want to go? What's your preferred itinerary? If you're a first-time cruiser, I recommend a Caribbean sailing because they are generally more affordable with shorter sailings and the options are abundant. So if you want to go with a Caribbean itinerary, if you're on Cruise Direct, you can filter by Caribbean. The next most important consideration in the early phases of narrowing down your cruise search is to consider the preferred length of your sailing. If you've never cruised before, I recommend a shorter sailing of just 3 to 5 nights. Now, I obviously love cruising, but I do acknowledge that this is not for everyone. Some people take a cruise and absolutely hate it. And nothing would be worse than figuring out that you hate cruising than being stuck on a cruise ship for a week or more. Now, if you do anything shorter than 3 days though, I feel like that's not enough to give you a fair shot of whether or not you actually like cruising. So that 3 to 5 night itinerary is a great one for a first timer. Now, regardless of if it's your first time or not, narrowing down itineraries based on length of sailing is another way to take a massive group of results and start to narrow it down. The third big question to narrow down your cruise search is, what's your preferred departure port? Once you've determined your itinerary and your sailing length, you can start to narrow it down further. And this next step is to decide where you want to sail from. I live in the Midwest, so my flights to Florida are easy and cheap, so I usually sail out of the Florida ports. But depending on where you live, you may have more accessible flights to some than others, and you may even be able to drive to some of them. Now, once you've done those big three, you're gonna have a much smaller list, but it still can be pretty big. Now we're gonna try to narrow it down and refine it even more. The next question to ask yourself is, what are your available sailing dates? You can often input ranges of dates. You don't have to be so narrow. And again, using an aggregator like Cruise Direct is going to show you all of your options, and then you can drill down, and then from there you can book in another way. You don't have to book the aggregator. Now, a related question to this is, when's the best time to cruise? In all honesty, I really do believe there is no bad time to cruise. I hate the advice of avoid hurricane season, because guess what, my friends? Hurricane season spans half the year, almost. So if you avoid and set out hurricane season, you're missing out on some prime sailing time. I've personally sailed every single month of the year, and there's never been a bad time to sail. And the off season, during hurricane season, or times when kids are traditionally in school, can yield significant savings and sometimes much less crowded ships. All right, so let's continue to narrow it down. Another important question is, what's your budget? Now that Cruise Direct or whatever aggregator of your choice has populated your options based on itinerary, length of sailing, potential departure ports, you can start to pick off and eliminate options that are outside of your price range. When you're looking at price, MSC and Carnival Cruise Lines is most often going to be the most affordable options, and more luxury lines like Cunard are going to be more expensive. Narrow it down based on budget. Then you want to consider your vibe. And by this I mean the culture of the cruise line, because they can be vastly different. For example, Carnival and Royal Caribbean are excellent choices if you want fun and family friendly. They tend to be more of a party crowd, but they also are family friendly with lots of amenities that kids love. Holland, Princess, and Norwegian, those are good bets for a quieter crowd, and they do tend to skew a little on the older side. Celebrity sort of falls in the middle. If you want the Disney experience, obviously go with Disney Cruise Line. Now, of all the cruise lines, MSC is usually by far the cheapest option, and it does provide more of a chill European vibe. If you want an adults only experience, an example of that would be Virgin Voyages, because they're adults only. They also are truly more all-inclusive compared to the competitors. There are other lines as well, but they all have their own kind of culture and vibe, and you have to just do research, check with other cruisers, and figure out what vibe you are looking for. Now from here, you want to really fine-tune your pick. You already decided where you wanted to go in terms of your preferred itinerary, but now let's start to fine-tune that itinerary a little more. For example, if you do opt for a Caribbean sailing, the Caribbean is vast and it can include dozens of potential port options. So at this stage, you want to really start to narrow down specific ports of call for your potential itineraries. And to get the most bang for your buck, prioritize itineraries that have more ports of call. That means more stops at ports, new potentially countries that you'll have to explore, versus sea days. Sea days are great. I actually like sea days, but those are times and days that you're on the ship, you do not get off and on, you're not exploring. Especially if you're doing a shorter sailing, you probably want to maximize the number of port calls. Now, the question is, what are some good ports and what are some bad ports? Totally subjective. In my opinion, there's no truly bad port, but some are more desirable than others. I have extensive port reviews for most of the most common ports on my blog, profmelissa.com. So check those out, go on online social cruise media groups, and learn more about the different ports of call, and you can help determine which ones are more preferable to others. This next consideration is one that it took me a really long time to realize is important, which is what class of ship do you prefer? I used to think that all cruise ships were more or less created equal. Now that I've sailed a lot, I realize no, they are not. There can be a vast difference in experience based on the class of ship. With Carnival, for example, their cheapest fares are going to be with their Fantasy class. That is their really small, really old ships. Versus their Excel class, which are newer ships built in the last 1 to 3 years. They're bigger, they're fancier, and much more well-maintained. Your experience is going to be totally different. And these Excel class ships are Jubilee, Mardi Gras, and Celebration. Of course, to sail the bigger, fancy new ships, you have to pay a little bit more, or sometimes a lot more. As you start to refine your search, consider the ship itself as part of your decision-making process. From this point, you should now have a pretty narrow selection of cruises from which to choose. And now it's a matter of just picking the one that you think is best for you and then actually booking it.